He's trying to trap me, you see. I'm not falling for it.
Has he ever trapped you?
You are ruthless.
Thank you. Hey. Do you play? I can teach you.
I'm gonna get in trouble.
Come here.
There's no way out of this.
Toby.
There's always a way out.
You can make it. We gotta go now. Now.
How did you do that?
He had a great teacher.
An incredible story. Two men, once enemies, sitting across from each other, not on a battlefield or in prison, but at a chessboard, sharing a quiet moment with their granddaughters by their side. You know, what we just witnessed was more than a game. It was a picture of redemption, of reconciliation, of love that refuses to be confined by past wounds. You know, imagine what it took for that soldier, American soldier, to extend kindness to the man who imprisoned him. Imagine what it took for the Vietnamese soldier to accept that kindness. Imagine what it took for both of them to move beyond their past, to the roles they had played in war, to sit together in friendship. You know, we live in a world that tells us enemies stay your enemies. We live in a world where justice is about payback. The world says people should get what they deserve. You know, Jesus presents a different way, a much harder way. In Luke chapter 6, verse 27, Jesus said, "Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you." You know, that's probably one of the most difficult commands Jesus ever gave to his disciples. You know, it's easy to love those who love us, isn't it? It's easy to be kind to those who are kind to us, but what about the ones who have wronged us? What about the ones who have hurt us deeply, who have cut us to our core? What does it mean to love our enemies? For the American soldier in that video, love looked like sharing a simple game of chess. For Joseph, as we'll see shortly, Love looked like forgiving his brothers who sold him into slavery. And for Jesus, well, love looked like stretching his arms out on a cross for the very people who mocked him and crucified him. You know, last week we talked about that love as is the most excellent way. But you know, today Jesus pushes that love to its hardest test, loving those who do not deserve it. We're going to look at what this kind of love really means, not just in theory, but in practice. How do we move past our pain, and how do we show mercy? How do we forgive when forgiveness feels impossible? And what happens to our hearts when we choose love over revenge? You know, the truth is, love, especially the kind of love that Jesus calls us to, is most often the most difficult move we will ever make. But as the chess match in the video reminds us, there is always a way out. It's our move. Our move, the way out, the way forward, is love. This morning as we begin, Jesus gives us a radical command. Love those who hurt you. You know, that's in contradiction to the common way of thinking in our world, in opposition to what the world tells us. But in Luke chapter 6, we read, "But to those who are willing to listen, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who hurt you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, offer the other cheek also. If someone demands your coat, offer your shirt as well. Give to anyone who asks, and when things are taken away from you, don't try to get them back. Do to others as you would like them to do to you. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you." Jesus doesn't say tolerate our enemies. Jesus doesn't tell us to ignore our enemies. No. We're told to actively love them. How weird is that? How bizarre of a thing for us to do. You know, our enemies hate us. That's why they're our enemies. Our enemies want to see us obliterated many times. Our enemies want to see harm come to us. Yet Jesus says to love them. It's unnatural. It's not right. You know, maybe though the problem is that our nature has become so corrupted by evil and wrong. Maybe that's the way we were meant to be from the beginning. But then again, we wouldn't have had enemies. Things hadn't changed in the beginning. You know, it's often said that verse 31 is the golden rule. Do to others as you'd have them do to you. We know it really well, don't we? We can say it right off the tips of our tongues. But what if it was more than that? What if that statement is more of a test of our faith than just a golden rule? What if it's a test of our love for others? Do to others as we want them to do to us. Love those who hate us is the context that we find that instruction. Bless those who curse you. See, it's not just about fairness in our daily interactions. It's a test as to whether we are truly following Jesus. Are we loving as Jesus loved? Practical side of what it means to love our enemies. After all, didn't God love us though we were his enemies? What if God treated us the way we often treat those who wronged us? What if God held a grudge because mankind crucified his son? What if God never let go of the fact that Adam and Eve disobeyed and dishonored him? What if God still punished us for the many rebellions of Israel? What if God still punished us for our own rejections of him? That would make God just, wouldn't it? He would be justified, but we would have a problem, wouldn't we? Because that must not be a God that loves us. And if we would say that of God, then what about us? You see, Jesus is calling us to love those who hurt us. Love those who betray us. Love those who have wronged us. And folks, it is not easy. But it's what God has called us to do, to live by His example. That's pretty radical, isn't it? It's absolutely difficult and the hardest thing we'll ever do. But it's what truly love is all about. So second this morning, this love is also a love that breaks the cycle of hurt. Think all the way back to Genesis chapter 45 and step back into the story of when Joseph's brothers came before him in Egypt. And so Joseph says, I am Joseph. You can feel the tension in the air in the room that day. The air was heavy with disbelief. The powerful Egyptian governor standing there before Joseph's brothers, dressed in the finest linen, adorned with Pharaoh's authority. He had just uttered the unthinkable. I am Joseph. I'm sure the words echoed off the marble walls, colliding with their memories of the past. The brothers stood there frozen, their hearts hammering in their chests. Could it be? Is this really true? Is this really happening? This man, this ruler, is he really our brother? The same brother we had thrown into a pit for gold or for silver, written off as dead? Is this really him? They had feared many things in their lives: famine, Pharaoh's wrath, the consequences of their past, but never had they imagined this moment. Joseph is alive. Their silence betrayed their terror. What would he do to them? Would he now wield his power in vengeance? Would he make them pay for their cruelty? But Joseph's voice softened. Please come closer. With trembling steps, they moved forward, unsure of what awaited them. And then, in a voice not filled with anger, but full of love, Joseph spoke again. I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery. The past rushed over them like a flood. His cries for help from the pit, their cold-hearted transaction, the weight of their guilt. But before they could crumble beneath their shame, Joseph continued. He said, don't be upset. Don't be angry with yourselves for doing this to me. No, it was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your life. Not a statement of condemnation. No retribution. That there was grace. Joseph didn't see himself as a victory of their betrayal, but as an instrument in God's sovereign plan. In Genesis 45:6, it says, Joseph said, this famine has ravaged the land for 2 years, and it will last 5 more, and there will neither be plowing nor harvesting. God has sent me ahead of you to keep you and your families alive and to preserve many survivors. His brothers stood in stunned silence, unable to grasp the mercy they were being shown. Joseph's voice was unwavering, though. He says, it was God who sent me here, not you. In their darkest sin, God had still been at work. In their betrayal, God had been weaving a greater story. What they had meant for harm, God meant for salvation. And now Joseph was not just offering them food, he was offering them life. Continuing on in verse 9, Joseph says, now hurry back to my father and tell him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me master over all the land of Egypt. Come down to me immediately. You can live in the region of Goshen, where you can be near me with all of your children and grandchildren, your flocks and your herds and everything you own. I will take care of you there, for there are still 5 years of famine ahead of us. Otherwise, you, your household, and all of your animals will starve. Joseph searched their faces. He looked for the one he had longed to see, his younger brother, Benjamin. Their eyes met, and in that moment, years of separation melted away. Joseph's shoulders trembled as tears streamed down his face. He fell upon Benjamin and he wept. Benjamin wept too, holding tightly to the brother he thought he would never see. And then one by one, Joseph embraced each one of his brothers, not with anger, but with love and forgiveness. The weight of their past was no longer a burden. It was a testimony of grace greater than their sin. Tears gave way to conversation. The brothers who had once betrayed him began freely speaking with him again. What had once been broken had been made whole. What had once been lost had been found. Because love won. Joseph had every reason to seek revenge after what his brothers had done. But instead he chose to love, to forgive. He broke the cycle of vengeance by choosing mercy. You see, loving our enemies, forgiving those who've wronged us, does not mean that we pretend the pain never happened. Instead, we choose to let God handle the justice. You know, this morning, do we have bitterness in our life that we need to give up? Do we need to put it at the foot of the cross? Do we need to surrender our brokenness so that we can break through to forgiveness? Whom do we need to love today? You know, I pray that we turn it over to God and leave the justice to Him, because third, you see this morning, God will take care of the justice. We have to surrender our anger, our frustration, our right for vengeance. We have to trust that God will take care of all of it. I think that's what David was talking about in Psalm verse 37. He says, don't worry about the wicked or envy those who do wrong. For like grass, they soon fade away. Like spring flowers, they soon wither. Trust in the Lord and do good. Then you will live safely in the land and prosper. Now, we may look at this and think, well, you know, I guess we should just ignore what happened, right? I guess that really that evil doesn't matter anymore. No, that's not what David is saying here. Mercy is not about excusing evil. Mercy is about trusting that God sees, that God knows, that God will judge rightly. Instead, we have a higher calling. In verse 5, David says, commit everything you do to the Lord. Trust Him, and He will help you. When we put our complete trust in Him, nothing else matters. We love and forgive, not because injustice does not matter. No, we love and we forgive because we trust that God, He will take care of whatever needs to happen. We give it to His very capable hands. And when we surrender our burden of anger and resentment to Him, we will get a sense of relief, a true sense of peace. You know, it's a peace that this world cannot give. It doesn't mean the pain never happened. It doesn't mean that the betrayal was insignificant, but it does mean that we are no longer carrying around the weight of the burden of trying to make things right on our own. You see, when we hold on to the bitterness, we're the ones who suffer. Resentment poisons our hearts, but when we commit everything to the Lord, as Psalm 37 said, we release that burden into the hands of the only one who is truly just. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending the wounds do not exist. It means choosing to trust God more than we trust our own desire for justice. Because when we do, when we step back and let God be God and do His thing, we find freedom. We find strength to love beyond reason. And we find peace that surpasses all understanding. Finally, this morning, Jesus challenges us to make the difficult choice of love, even when we have been hurt and wronged or mistreated. You see, we are to show mercy, the hardest yet holiest choice. The world says, give people what they deserve. Jesus says, give them what they do not deserve. That's mercy. Jesus is making it clear that loving those who love us, that's easy. We all do that. There's nothing remarkable about kindness when it is returned in equal measure. But mercy, that's the hard one. Mercy is love extended without expectation. Mercy is love given to the undeserving. Mercy is the radical, unreasonable love of God. Back in Luke chapter 6, Jesus went on to tell his disciples, starting at verse 32, if you love only those who love you, why should you get any credit for that? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, why should you get any credit? Even sinners do that much. And if you lend money only to those who can repay you, why should you get credit? Even sinners will lend to sinners for a full return. No, love your enemies. Do good to them. Lend to them without expecting to be repaid. Then your reward from heaven will be very great, and you will truly be acting as children of the Most High God. For He is kind to those who are unthankful and wicked. You must be compassionate, just as your Father is compassionate. Jesus tells us that mercy is not about fairness. It's about reflecting the heart of our Father. God is kind to the ungrateful. God blesses the wicked. God loves beyond reason. And He calls us to do the very same thing. If we ever wonder why we should love, the answer is simple. Because He first loved us. That's what John is talking about in 1 John chapter 4. He says, such love has no fear. Because perfect love expels all fear. If we are afraid, it is for fear of punishment. And this shows that we have not fully experienced His perfect love. We love each other because He first loved us. That's the truth of mercy, friends. God did not love us because we were good. God loved us because He is good. And if God's mercy is undeserved, how can we withhold mercy from others? Paul gives us a clear challenge in Romans chapter 12. He says, do not copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. You see, the world teaches revenge and repayment. Eye for an eye. Teaches fairness. Everyone must be equal. Jesus teaches love and mercy and grace. To love beyond reason is not natural. Folks, it's supernatural. It's divine. It's the very heart of God. We've got to ask ourselves, will we choose to reflect His mercy? Will we choose to love even when it costs us something? Will we live as children of the Most High, showing a love that makes no sense except in light of the cross? way back in 1995, Azim Kasama, his 20-year-old son Tarek was fatally shot during a robbery in San Diego, California. And I'll just be honest, I butchered that name. So, anyways. The assailant was a 14-year-old boy by the name of Tony Hicks. He had become the youngest in the state of California to be tried as an adult. Overwhelmed with grief, Kamasa faced a pivotal choice: to be consumed by anger or to seek a path of forgiveness. Well, he chose the latter. He reached out to Ples Felix, Hicks's grandfather and guardian. Together, they founded the Tarek Kamasa Foundation, aiming to prevent youth violence through education and mentorship. Their collaboration not only honored Tariq's memory, but also provided Tony Hicks with a chance at redemption. After serving 24 years in prison, Hicks was released and he joined that foundation and its efforts, embodying the transformative power of forgiveness. You see, even in the face of profound loss, choosing mercy over vengeance can lead to healing and a positive change. 3 questions for you this morning. Who in your life is hard to love? You can put a name there. I know you can. Where do you need to trust God's justice instead of seeking your own? And what is one practical step you can take this week to extend mercy? You know, it becomes very difficult to extend mercy and love others, though, if we have not first been filled with God's love for us. This morning, if you've never given your life to Him, if you've never felt that cleansing power of God's love, I encourage you to take the step forward today. Come to the Savior who gave everything in order to show you how much He loves you. Come and find grace this morning, mercy, and love in His arms. And then let's love this world in such a way that it's beyond all reason.